All right, welcome to the Beyond the Lines podcast. In a world filled with so much division, we want to do something about that. We all have these lines that we draw in the sand where we just feel like that is our limit. We don't want to go past that line. We don't want to listen past that line. We don't want to love someone on the other side of the line. We just can't understand someone on the other side of this line. So our goal with this podcast is to treat all people with the dignity that they deserve, even if we disagree with them. My name is Jonathan Miller, and I'm one of your designated listeners today on the podcast, and I'm joined by my co-listener, Clayton Edelman.
Hey, how's it going?
How's it going? That's one of the new title I want to give us, by the way, is listeners rather than hosts, because I feel like
that.
A big part of our podcast is all about listening. And sometimes we'll talk, just us and have DJ here and have all the hosts together and we'll talk about things. But I really like this idea of being co-listeners into people's stories, especially the ones we don't understand.
Definitely. No, that's a big part of it. I'm ready to listen.
Yeah, cool. I never told Clayton that, so I'm revealing it today. But I like it. Designated listeners. Anyways, today on the podcast, we have an absolutely amazing person. I'm not just saying that. She is joining us today to talk about the challenges and perceptions of being a single mom. Renee Bennett. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. Honored to be here.
Awesome. You are a single mom yourself.
Yes.
But you also have started a thriving single moms group here in the Phoenix Valley, and you have just this massive heart. I've heard so many stories from you for single moms, and you're doing incredible work. So thank you for what you've done, what you are doing, and thank you for being here today.
Yes, my pleasure. And I'm assuming it'll be good listening because probably neither of you have been a single mom, I'm assuming. So
I have
think
not.
that's a safe bet.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that's probably the case. So.
Yeah, so we're here to listen because we don't have that experience at all. And there's really no way for us to do that. So that's the big part of our podcast is there's no way for us to have everybody else's experiences, but there is a way for us to listen and to hear people's experiences. So thank you for being a part of that.
You are welcome. I'm glad to be here. In answer to your question, yes, I am a single mom, and I'm a mom to two teenagers. I have a daughter who is 17 and a son who is 15, and I have been a single mom for about 9 years. And I've never thought I would be in that position. It wasn't ever a choice or a plan for my life, but this is where I found myself. And after several years of raising the kids on my own, I just felt God telling me on my heart, you need to start building a community of other single moms. I was really fortunate that when I first got divorced, another friend of mine was also a single mom. And so we had each other, and by pure chance, which I of course don't think is chance, but we had the same schedule. So we had our kids on the same weekend, and then we didn't have our kids on the same weekend.
Okay.
So that allowed us to go and do things with our kids, all of us, and have fun. Or when the kids were gone and we were alone, we had each other to go out for dinner or go to a movie. And that's something people don't really think about, what a shift it is if you go through a divorce, that all of a sudden, these couple friendships change. Sometimes you don't really have a place. You feel like your friends are busy with their families if they're married. So what do you do? And especially your first times being alone without your children, if you do have a schedule where they go back and forth. So I was really fortunate and blessed to have that relationship, and I wanted that for other moms. But of course, I didn't listen right away. I was busy, and I put it off for a while, and I really felt God kept telling me that I needed to do this. And then finally he started having other people come up and tell me that they really had thought about me as they met some other moms. So about 3 years ago, we started a group here at the church and have just invited moms in, and they don't have to go to the church. They just have to be a single mom. And it's grown from 6 moms the first year to about 130 now.
Wow. I didn't know it was that big.
Yeah. It's been crazy because what's happened now is the moms have found community here and found friendships and support and understanding, and then they tell their other single moms friends. Or we've had some moms that have moved here from out of town and are looking for a place to go to church and a place to find friends, and they're single mom with kids, and they find a group and they're like, oh, let's try this. And so we've had them come in lots of different ways, but it's been really, really amazing.
I just want to compliment you too. I mean, anytime I'm interacting with somebody who is a single mom and I find out their story, I'm always quick to say, hey, do you know Renee? And they're always, oh yeah, I know Renee. I'm plugged into her ministry already.
I love that.
So I know you're doing a great job, and
I love it.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Can we talk about just shifting a little bit? You said that you went through a divorce.
Yes.
There is a huge stigma around that, especially in the circles we run in, which is Christian circles, right? For the last, for for a long time,
Yes.
Divorce is a no word. You don't talk about it. It's one of the big sins, as people say. And so as a person who's gone through divorce,
Yes.
how have you kind of experienced that? Have you felt rejected at times? Like, how has that been?
I feel like I have been fortunate that I didn't experience that as much personally, but I hear it a lot from the moms that are part of our ministry. Part of my story is I've been divorced twice, which a lot of people don't know. And I used to also kind of assume that people who were divorced didn't try very hard, or why didn't they go to counseling, or why didn't they have a commitment? And then I was married in my 20s, and after 3 years of marriage, my husband came home and said, no offense, I like you as a person, but I'm not in love anymore, and I shouldn't have gotten married, and I'm going to go. And so without me even knowing it was coming or seeing it, I was totally blindsided and became a single person. I wasn't a mom then, but it devastated me at that time. And I didn't even realize in my mind, I had never considered that you can be a divorced person without you wanting that.
Yeah.
And so that was my big shift where I was like, wow, okay, this isn't always as simple as I think it is. So after a few years, I was remarried and had my kids and moved to Arizona. And at that time, I was in a very difficult marriage. And it was really, really hard the whole time. And there were addictions and infidelities and all kinds of things that made it very, very difficult. And I also realized at that time that you can't be married alone. So again, even though I was totally committed and totally dedicated and didn't want the marriage to end and would have done anything, and I really did for years and years and years and years of forgiveness and counseling and trying everything, unfortunately, it also ended in a divorce, which was never my plan nor desire. And even as a person who's ironically been divorced twice, I would consider myself against divorce. I don't counsel people that that's the answer and to get a divorce. And every one of my single moms that's experienced divorce would say it was the most difficult thing they ever went through.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a choice that a lot of them made. So
that is so good. That is such great perspective, because I think that what you said before you ever experienced a divorce, you're like, well, why would you ever get a divorce? You can do all this counseling. You do this and everything will, you can try hard enough and it can make it. And sometimes that's just not possible. And that's the sad reality of our world and the brokenness of everything. And when you go through that, the last thing you need is somebody thinking, well, she could have done better, right?
Right.
Like
yeah. My mom always used to get annoyed because she'd hear people say it takes two. And she thought that was implying that both parties were at fault. Now, of course, both parties are infallible, not infallible.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, both parties make mistakes. Of course, both parties own part of the problem, but it takes two to make it work. So that's my takeaway from when I hear people saying it takes two. It takes two to save the marriage. It takes two to make a marriage work. It doesn't necessarily take two to end one or to cause a divorce. One person can make that choice. One person can leave alone, and it doesn't take two to cause the divorce, but it does take two to make it work.
Yeah.
And I will say that now that I've met so many single moms and heard so many stories, the thing that's been interesting to me is it's also not always divorce. So of my single moms group, I have had women that have been victimized and got pregnant that way. I have women that have chose to foster children and adopted them and became a single mom.
Wow.
I have mothers that have taken in their nieces and nephews and adopted them because the parent wasn't able. Oh, wow. I have widows. I have people that have been abandoned, thought they had a good solid marriage, and then the husband fell in love with someone else and left after 20 years of a really good marriage, and it was devastating. So each time I hear these stories, whether the woman was, victimized or abandoned or chose to be a mom or had one mistake and then she was the one that stayed to raise the child, I always see them as heroes. And when you hear these stories, it's amazing what they've overcome. Some of them, got married young, had children right away, and didn't work. And then years later, their husband's like, okay, well, I don't want to be with you anymore. And they've had to put themselves through school, find a career, buy a home. And, I have gals that have become teachers and career people, started their own businesses, and they weren't even educated when their spouse left.
Wow.
So I'm always like, you are a rock star. I'm impressed. I'm proud of
That's
you.
incredible.
You guys are amazing.
Yeah. That's really cool. And I imagine your ministry and the work that you do with single moms, it's highly relational, right?
Yes.
And so for you, like as somebody who, it's almost a pastoral role, like, hey, you are loving and caring for these women
Yes.
based on your own experiences. What do you see being like success in terms of, hey, we've come alongside you and X has happened, or like, how do you see God working in the single moms ministry?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing for me is I have chosen at this time, I haven't dated or anything like that. And I'm not against that. And I love men, and I have a son, and I have dad and great guys in my life. So I'm not anti-man, but it's been really interesting how some women have felt some freedom in seeing me or other leaders not be in a relationship and not be solely seeking that.
Yeah.
It's just being in a waiting period of what I don't know what God's going to bring next in my life. And I'm okay where I'm at, and I'm enjoying the season I'm at. And I feel like a lot of times people feel that they're a half of something, or they can't be completely fulfilled until they're remarried. I don't like the term broken family, because I say when we have Christ, that fills that spot. So I don't want women to own that for the rest of their life. Your family's broken, because your children can thrive. Again,
Yeah.
I don't think it's the ideal. I don't think it's God's plan. It's not what I would have chosen. I know most of my moms would say that too. But in spite of, right, in spite of sin, in spite of bad choices, in spite of everything that all of us make, not just in single moms, He can redeem that. And so that's always something I want them to know is you are forgiven, you are seen, you are chosen. And throughout the Bible, Jesus always esteemed women.
Yeah.
And in John 8, I believe it is, where the woman, they were going to stone her for committing adultery. And he said, okay, if you haven't sinned, go ahead, throw the first stone. And everybody walked away. He didn't condemn her. He wasn't picking up a stone and saying, you're so terrible.
Yeah.
And a lot of times women can feel that way if they've gone through that and feel isolated or feel unwelcome at church, or that there's nowhere to sit because everybody's coupled up and you feel different. But that's been the power of seeing so many women come together, is realizing that there's so many and all different ways that we've come here, but let's just support each other. So now they sit together. I see them in the lobby, greeting each other and happy to see each other. Someone knows they came to church. Someone's happy to see them. Someone's checking on them. And we do a lot of ministry, even on a group me chat.
Yeah.
There's prayer requests and free things we're swapping. And, if you're stressed out, you can post something and you see all these women just come around each other and support each other. And so the win for me is just letting them see there's other people in that situation, and that you can be happy and you can be fulfilled and forgiven and thrive, and just have them be part of a community where they're accepted and loved.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Can you talk a little bit more? I've heard some stories about how not only does your women's group, single moms group, come around each other and provide community, but sometimes like somebody who hasn't been a part of the group before is struggling, a single mom, and then they don't go outside themselves. They do something themselves to help that person. And I know there's tons of stories like that. Can you share any of them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like anything we go through in life, once we've been through it and walked in those shoes, we have a new set of eyes for that. And so I know God has put this on my heart, and honestly, I wouldn't change what has happened in the past because of where it's brought me and just seeing the love of all these women. So even though a lot of them have maybe a smaller amount of means, like lower income, less to give, their heart is so in it for each other that when another woman is like, I'm literally getting evicted, I have to stay in my car tonight, I see all these women come around. And one example is one gal was in that place where she left an abusive relationship, and she had nowhere to go because that was her home. And so she was in her car with her daughter, and right away all the women came around. They all were Venmoing money, so we were able to give her a cash gift. We asked her what else she needed, and she said, well, clothes for my daughter and some toiletries. So they put together a big gift basket of shampoo and toothpaste and clothes. All of us have so many clothes for our kids. She got bags of beautiful clothes for her daughter, and she hadn't even met us yet. She had connected through an email. And she wept, and she just couldn't believe that people who didn't know her cared about her and saw her. Another mom moved to town and was pregnant, and the guy wasn't in the view anymore. And so she was home on bed rest, pregnant. And she did have her mom in town, but she was still lonely and isolated and going through that alone and knowing you're going to have a baby alone and all those things. And we hadn't met her either. Again, she had just emailed the group and was trying to connect. So we put together a little shower gift for her and put it on her doorstep. I didn't want to intrude. I hadn't met her, but all the women collectively put money together and got her a gift card and baby clothes and just a pretty gift and put it on her doorstep. Same thing. She just wept because of kindness. And so I think people can underestimate the kindness of a gesture and just showing love. It doesn't have to be huge. I think sometimes we think it has to be this big, I have to, save everybody and make a big thing of it, when these small gestures of love that are doable make a huge impact. And this is all women, that are coming together and they're more than eager to share and to help.
So I know you're talking, obviously, this is what your gals are doing for one another. And I can imagine it would be scary, especially if you're going through a pregnancy and having to give birth alone and whatnot. Stuff like that is just terrifying. How can maybe those who are listening or watching to this, how can we better understand the story of single moms and come alongside and partner with you or just love on you and care for you? Like, what does that look like for the church?
A couple things come to mind. One of them is I don't think people intend to necessarily judge someone, but it can feel uncomfortable. Even when you're friends with other couples and one of your friends, like the spouse, leaves, sometimes other women feel uncomfortable inviting the single mom to come and be part of the group because I don't know if they think, you're going to be after their husband or something, or that it's vulnerable because you're not attached to someone. But oftentimes those women really do need community. And especially if you already had a relationship with them, they can be very isolated when that happens. So if you know someone who goes through a divorce, don't be afraid to reach out to them and care about them. And because it's really an odd feeling that, you never were unfaithful before. And now all of a sudden you're put in this category of like, oh, I shouldn't have this single person over with our couples. And so it can just be an odd thing. So maybe just invite a lot of people over and maybe include them. And then as far as at church, I do know some women that have felt there's really not a spot for them and like childcare is an issue, things like that. So if you know single moms, offer to watch their children so that they can go to a women's conference or attend something at church, because it's always an issue to find childcare and pay for childcare. Yeah. And so oftentimes there's things not available to them at the church because everything costs money and everything you need to have someone watch your kids.
Yeah, totally. That's really good. And I think something I really want to go back to while you were talking earlier, and I'm not going to quote you perfectly here, but you said something along the lines of like, when you've walked that path already, it's so easy to go back and help somebody going through the same journey or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. I think that's so powerful, especially for any of us who are going through anything, right? When we're going through it, it sucks, but it helps us to look back and say, oh, I can help somebody when they're going through that now. But for the person who has never walked that journey, I can see and have heard things where they look at the person who's going through a divorce or somebody who, oh, they're pregnant and they're alone. Yes. That's their own fault. That's the first thought that often will come to mind. It's somebody who hasn't ever been through that experience. Right. That's their fault. And instead of being like, you know what? It may have been their fault. I don't care. I'm going to go love them. And I think that's loving beyond their lines that we draw in the sand. And often that we draw that line at that thing where it's like, well, they messed up. I don't, it's their own fault. Deal with your own mistakes. Well, that's a line that you've drawn. And no matter if that's even correct, right? That might be totally a lie. Right. And it's very likely, right? Often. That's totally a lie in the first place, that line you're drawing. But even if it's true, why can't you love beyond that? Mm-hmm. Why can't you step beyond that? And often it's because we don't know the story. We don't know the experience, and we've never been there. So what's the best thing to do is to go listen. Mm-hmm. And that's the best way to love and listen and be there for that person. For sure. Speaking of some of those labels and things, like what are some of the the labels and perceptions that you most often encounter being a single mom, or your friends and your group that are single moms? What are those things that you encounter on a daily basis, almost like,
right,
where, man, this just sucks. People stop,
Right.
please stop and listen.
Right. A few things come to mind. One is sometimes people assume that they didn't have a good moral compass and that perhaps they were promiscuous or something like that. Or some of my moms have had people go, how many dads are there? When they were married to someone, had 4 kids, and then got a divorce for whatever reason. That doesn't necessarily mean they were sleeping around and getting pregnant with all these different people. So that's an assumption. And also just that, like you said, that it's their fault. And I think some of that comes down to fear. When I've talked to friends of mine that haven't been in through a divorce and they've made a comment about something like that someone chose that, or maybe the woman wasn't, being loving enough, or, giving her husband enough affection. There's all these things that people want to choose as the reason. And I think it's because people are afraid if it happened to somebody that you totally don't expect, like a Christian friend of yours, this Christian couple that's had a great marriage for 20 years and then one of them leaves, that can be scary for the other married couples to go, whoa, if that happened to them, that could happen to me. And so I think people, to make themselves feel better, want to come up with a reason why that happened so that they can take a deep breath and go, I don't have to worry about that because whatever it is, I always keep my house clean. I don't, treat my husband with respect. Well, a lot of these women did those things. A lot of these women did these things too, and it didn't necessarily work out for them. But I feel like a lot of times people want to make a reason for it for their own comfort so that they feel safe.
Wow. I have never thought of that before, and I could definitely see how that's true. Like, to see somebody over there who, like, man, we know the Joneses. The Joneses are always going to be together, and they're not. And you're like,
right,
man, that could happen to me. Like, I thought the Joneses were better than my life,
right.
And all of a sudden, oh, no, it must have been Mrs. Jones's fault. She wasn't doing this or that.
Right.
That I could see definitely popping up. But man, that is great perspective.
Yeah. And then, like I said, like a lot of times, some of them they were widowed or they adopted children. Like there's so many ways. Some of those are very brave ways to become a single mom, and you stepped right into that. Or, your husband died. What are you going to do? You're a single mom. So as I was saying before, I really see them as heroes. They've stepped up. They're doing the very best they can to support their child, take care of the whole house, take care of the car, take care of the taxes, take care of providing, buy the groceries, cook the meals, go buy everything for school. It is a lot of work to do everything by yourself.
Yeah. Well, and even just when you're just talking just now, some moms adopt, some moms are widows.
Right.
I think the widow part is really eye-opening because, like you were saying, the perceptions, if somebody gets a divorce and their ex-spouse is still alive, those ideas of, oh, they were promiscuous or who did what, like
right.
that instantly comes to play. But if we were to look at somebody who was a widow, we would immediately say, hey, how can I love you? How can I jump in?
For sure.
But the thing is, they're both single moms. And last time I checked, we're all still human and we all make mistakes and we all sin.
Right.
So the widow is still just as sinful as somebody who got a divorce. And that's just even eye-opening for me as like, hey, how do we push away those perceptions of, well, because this person got a divorce, like we've got to kind of exclude them and not include them with everything. But yeah, that's really helpful for Renee.
And I will say for me too, that was one of the reasons I probably didn't receive as much judgment, is because there was infidelity on the part of my ex. So people automatically were like, oh, well, okay, then that's acceptable. And it's kind of okay for you to be divorced. Now, granted, there still is a little judgment, like maybe I should have done XYZ, but they don't know what I did or what the story was. But a lot of times that's like the factor that people decide whether you deserve or don't deserve something. And as you were saying, all of us as human beings on this earth deserve and don't deserve lots of different things. And so it's interesting that people feel comfortable in some contexts more than others having that place of judgment. And sometimes I think it really is just total unawareness. And you might even not realize that you're thinking that, because as I said myself, before it happened to me, I was the one going, oh, they must not have gone to counseling. They must not have tried very hard. Weren't they committed? And then I learned the hard way that you can be really committed and still end up divorced. So it's just perspective.
Definitely. I want to jump back to something, you had mentioned you've got moms too who are maybe in abusive relationships.
Right.
And I don't know our listeners or our viewers or necessarily who they are, but would you have any resources or encouragement to maybe those who are going through something like that, to where you can say, hey, here's how you get help when it comes to stuff like that?
Well, I will say through Central, we have our CARES ministry. And if you just go to our website, centralaz.com, there's a page on there of a lot of different resources for all sorts of different things, or just even calling your local church. And there are all kinds of resources and all kinds of places for people to get help. I never, ever think a woman should stay in a situation like that, obviously. And when they leave, that's often the most dangerous time, because that's when things amp up. And if they are being abused and the spouse is controlling and abusive and the woman leaves, that's when it can get very dangerous. So a lot of times they can't do it alone. That's why they end up going back, because it's scary to leave, because it's not safe. And they might use their children as a weapon in that. I had a mom that he locked her in the house for several days and took away her phone, and then she almost lost her job because they were like, well, you didn't call in, where have you been? And she was being held in her home. And she, in order to leave, was one that I said had to live in a car. So sometimes those choices, people say, well, I would never. But you don't always understand all of the dynamics of it. But definitely, if there's a woman being hurt, she needs to find help so that she can protect herself and her child.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's resources to help women do that, and shelters.
Yeah, and I think also recognizing that everybody has a story that we don't see is really, really important for us as we continue to work on our listening. I was just listening to an old podcast and with DJ, and he talked about how he doesn't want to argue with people on Facebook he doesn't know. Okay. Because when you when you see something that is just a small blip of their life, you can then say, well, I know everything about them now. Right. And I think that applies to single, like, oh, I know they're a single mom, so now I know everything about them. You don't. Or I know that they got a divorce and I know this part of it, but you don't know all of the story. Or you know that they're in an abusive relationship. Well, you shouldn't have gotten that relationship in the first place. You don't know what led to that relationship. Right. Like our brains light up when we make up stories. Like we get dopamine for making up stories, because it's like this thing where it keeps us safe or something, or like this ancient, I don't know. Anyways, I'm not a scientist, but I just know our brains light up when we make a story. And if we can just start recognizing that we make those stories up, and then listen to stories like yours and like some of the people in your that are in your ministry, we can start realizing we could slow ourselves down more and be more loving to everybody in every situation, recognizing that there's more to the story. Everybody's life is way more complex than we make it out to be.
For sure. I just read a book recently written by a single mom who started a ministry in another state, and she talked about her story at the beginning of the book, and she talked about the trauma of her childhood. And we haven't talked much about that, but in her particular story, she was, abused as a child and abandoned by her father, and all these terrible things happened. So then she said, I know I made bad decisions. I was young. I was dumb. I, hooked up with these different guys trying to feel loved, trying to feel seen and known. And she did get pregnant a couple times at like 16, 17 years old. So yeah, she's one that technically we would go, yep, see, it's your fault. But she had been through so much trauma and abuse and didn't feel worthy and didn't feel valued, and then ended up putting herself again in another bad situation. So again, my heart just goes out to women like that. And so many people don't know what they've been through, and they can look at things from their, picture perfect life, which no one has. But I'm saying from the outside, you can just look at someone and go, well, she shouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have made that choice. But again, we don't know their history and their story.
Yeah, that's good. Is there any advice you'd give to somebody out there who maybe is in another state or something like that, and they're like, wow, I wish I had a single mom's ministry like that. Like maybe I have community in my small group, but I would like to be what you're doing here. Yeah. Is there any advice on how to start something like that?
I would say just finding even a small community for yourself, even if literally you have one or two other single moms that you meet with, but then just being open to others. So we had to get the word out there and make a plan. So we just planned events. We're like, well, let's go to the park on this day. And we planned out several things in a row so that women could could come and join, because our lives are crazy and you need to plan things far out, because a lot of times you can't make a last minute decision.
Yeah.
But just starting small, like we didn't have a goal. I still don't. It's not my mission, it's God's mission. But I was like, let's just bring people together and let them see other women that live life the same way they do. You can talk at a level just like you can with things you've gone through. You know, you lose a parent, all of a sudden another friend loses a parent. They can talk at a whole new level. So whatever it is we walk through, like we have kind of a language that we understand of things that we struggle with, and we can have compassion for what that person says based on how we feel. So I would say just start small, even if it's 2 people. And you don't have to have a huge community. It might grow, it might not. But for me, as I said at the beginning, just having that one friend that we travel together. We're like, okay, well, everybody else is on a family vacation. I don't really like to go on vacation by myself and drive alone and try to navigate where the hotel is and all those things. So my friend and I would do it together and split the costs, and it was way more fun, and the kids had other kids. So I had one friend. That was my community. And so you don't need to make a big, lofty ambition out of it. Just find a friend or 2 and make connections and friendships.
Would you just kind of share with our listeners just how can people get involved in the Single Moms Ministry if they're here locally, a part of Central, or know someone who like, hey, I want to invite you to do this?
Yeah, I would love to. At Central, on our website under the Women's Ministry page, there's a section called Moms. And if you open that up, there's the different campus moms, and then there's also one called Single Moms. And if you click there, there's a button right there to register. Of course, it's free because we're single moms. And it has our schedule of events on there as well. So what we do right now, we're meeting in person on 2 campuses and working on getting the other campuses going. And we do a lot together, all the campuses. So each month we get together at 2 of the campuses during a Sunday morning service, so that the kids already have childcare, where we're working through a devotional together. And that's our time to get in the Word and pray for each other and talk and be authentic. And then once a month we also have a social, which is always child friendly, whether it be we're doing decorating fall cupcakes this month. We're doing a service project and having a speaker and a Friendsgiving in November. So there's a fun event every month, and all the dates are on the website, and you can click a button there to join for free, and then we'll reach out.
Cool.
I love that.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for joining us, Renee.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a joy and a great opportunity to be able to work with you every day. So
yeah,
you're cool.
I appreciate it.
Well, we record here at Central Christian Church in Phoenix, Arizona. Our church is pursuing this mantra of love beyond, hence beyond the lines, love beyond your lines, which calls us to empathize with people who are different with us and to build bridges of peace, which don't exist right now in a lot of places in the world. If you're interested at all in learning more about our church, you can check us out at centralaz.com. We'll also leave different links that Renee mentions in the show notes today, so you can click on those if you're interested. And we have online churches as well as online services, as well as a bunch of different locations in the Phoenix metro area. If you're local and you want to check us out, we'll see you at the next episode of Beyond the Lines. Until then, go love beyond your lines.
See ya.
Thank you.